Hello! This video is about the unknown compound lab that you're going to be talking about. So I would first start by going to my website, which you can see here, and opening up the unknown lab, which is in the bottom rightish of your intermolecular column. Below there you'll see an evaporation reading, which might come in handy, and the good and the bad flowchart, which I'm going to be talking about too and showing you in this video. But let's go to that unknown lab. Okay, so the main idea, if you look in the back of the lab right now, you'll see there are 7 different unknowns back there. And they're labeled A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And they are these 7, into the next page, different unknowns. So you can see that I actually didn't name all of them. I know if you look at the first one, NaCl, you clearly know that's table salt. But the next compound, which I call frank, you can see that you probably don't know exactly what that substance is. You might have a slight clue, but you probably won't know for sure. Clearly Simon is actually water, but if you look down, you may not know the other ones, and I did that for a reason, because I don't want you to just go and look up NaCl or water, things like that, and find their physical properties. I want you to focus on their structure. This whole lab is about looking at the structure of these 7 different compounds, looking at the structure and deciding what kinds of properties would they have, like what kind of intermolecular attractions might they have, and then, because of that, what kinds of surface tension would it have? At what rate would they evaporate? At what rate would they have a boiling point, or melting point, or solubility, or conductivity, viscosity? Those are all properties we've kind of looked at. I know you might be thinking, but we didn't talk about evaporation. That's true, but it's in here. You can see I highlighted it there, and that's what you have the reference article for. It might be something that comes in handy. The whole goal of this lab is to look at those unknowns that are in the back of the lab there and decide. Unknown A, that's labeled in the back of the lab, is unknown A Sally, NaCl, is unknown A Frank, this compound, is unknown A Simon, or is it Ramona, Betty, Bob, and the last one, George. So that's the whole goal, is to be able to decide what A, B, C, D, and so on are in each of the labs in the back. Okay, so how are you going to go about it? The procedure is up to you. You can see the directions here. You may not boil anything, but you'll want to consider all of the different physical properties that we've talked about. And the physical properties are listed for you there to kind of remind you of things. Things to consider, you might want to start with an easy test, or maybe a reliable test, or maybe a test that really splits things up into 2 groups. Like, really think about what kind of test. And you might be thinking, I don't really know how I can make a flow chart. You can make a flow chart, a procedure, kind of like normal style, or you could make a dichotomous key, whatever kind of works for you. Let me show you an example of a flow chart. This one's a bad example, but only by slightly. So it's actually pretty good, and we're going to talk about it first. Okay, let's say my unknowns were a graham cracker, we'll start at the very top here, chocolate, marshmallow, and orange juice. The first test I might do is separate it based on states and matter. Now you can't separate things based on looks, because I might look at a compound and be like, that looks white. Somebody else might look at it and be like, that looks white-yellow. Somebody else might look at it and be like, no, that's got a hint of red in it. So that's so subjective according to the person. You also couldn't use smell, because how you smell things is subjective to the person. So you have to be very generic. You have to be able to have data that anybody could agree on, like state and matter. Anyone can agree that orange juice is a liquid, graham cracker is a solid, chocolate's a solid, and marshmallow is a solid. We might not agree on what exact color chocolate is, whether it's a darker chocolate or lighter brown, but we can all agree that it's a solid. So that's my first step. Separate it based on states of matter. So I've got now solids separated from my liquid. My liquid is definitely orange juice. Okay, so now I've got to separate these 3. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is try to cut it in half. I can see that the graham cracker and the chocolate actually cuts in half, but the marshmallow does not. Ooh, you can see my flowchart goes all the way to right here. If it doesn't cut in half, it's called the marshmallow. So now I've got these 2, the graham cracker and the chocolate. Well, chocolate melts, but graham crackers don't. They just kind of burn. So I'm going to try to melt it, and I can see, yes, chocolate will melt. The other property of graham cracker is they do not melt. So you can see, based on this flowchart, I was able to separate it into its all different unknowns. Now yours are going to end up in the end as being, down here, like your liquid one might be, we'll go back to unknown lab, final liquid, might be water. That's one of the liquids. So yours, instead of here, the liquid would be water, but you'd have to have the other ones too, the water and I don't know who else is liquidy ones, if you chose to separate based on state of matter first. That's your choice. So that when you're using the flowchart, you would take all of your unknowns, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you'd first separate them based on states of matter. And then you'd see which ones are liquid, and then go from there. So that in the end you could just say that A is definitely George, or B is definitely Sally, whatever it might be. Now this is a pretty good flowchart. This is kind of my favorite way to go for a procedure, but you don't have to do it this way. I want to show you what's bad about it by looking at the good example. The good parts are the parts in yellow. Before I said chop it in half. Oh, whoops. I'll have to fix that later. Chop it in half. This time I'm going to say, as I have a typo in there, this time I'm going to say place a chisel on top of the sample and hit its light with a hammer. This way you're telling me how you're going to chop it in half. Don't just assume I know. Or like just below that in the melting. You can't just say melt it. There's many different ways to melt it. How exactly will you do that? You have to be more specific. In order to melt it here, I don't have to get it very hot. I just put it into a small sample into a beaker, and then I put that little beaker inside a bigger beaker, and inside that larger beaker was hot water at 85 degrees Celsius. And it melted the chocolate. So basically I created a hot water bath, if you've done that, or a hot water bath that you might melt chocolate in if you're a cook. So that's more specific. That's what makes this one a good example. Okay, so going back to our unknown lab. Your goal is first to create a procedure. Hopefully you can get that done today. If you don't get it done today, we're going to have a talk. But hopefully you come up with a procedure. You could type it out if you want, or you could hand draw it. I honestly think hand drawing is going to be a lot faster, but that's totally up to you. Hand draw it out, and then later on you can make it more pretty and actually take a picture of it to put in your lab. Because your lab report is going to be your procedure. Then of course you need a data table. You're going to have a claim saying unknown A is Sally, unknown B is George, or whatever it might be. And then the theory. Now the theory part is going to be just one of your steps. It would be really a lot of work to be able to explain your entire theory, and that's just too much. I'm going to have you draw from a hat and pick out one theory that you have to explain from one of your steps. If you're wondering how I'm going to grade it, the rubric is attached down there, so you can see that. But this is all done in partners, so every piece is done in partners. It is officially due on Thursday. So you're going to have today to work on it. Most of Monday, we're going to go over a textbook homework on Monday, and then depending on how your lab practical goes on Tuesday, you might have some time on Tuesday and Wednesday as well. So it's going to be mostly all class time for this. That's my goal. I hope that kind of clears up some of things for you. You might have some questions though, so feel free to ask me.